you're a fan of close finishes to championship games with top teams contending and maybe a little bit of gamesmanship, twisting of the rules and some underhanded controversy, then the 1921 season will be of interest to you. We cover it in Football History Rewind, part number 42, coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with PigskinDispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And we have some great things going on here at Pigskin Dispatch. Before we get into our Football History Rewind, part number 42, the 1921 season. First of all, we want to make sure that you know you can get into a trivia game that we have each and every day. It's called Touchdown Trivia on the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch podcast and PigskinDispatch.com. And you can get involved by going to the front page of PigskinDispatch.com, or if you want to get it involved in your email inbox every single day, you'll get that with all the other posts and podcasts we have coming out on Pigskin Sports. And it's the Touchdown Trivia each and every day. It's a great clue to get there. And don't worry if you look at the question and you're like going, wow, I'm not quite sure about that. There's an Audible. Scroll down to the bottom of that page and there's a link to take you to an article, most of them on PigskinDispatch.com or to SportsHistoryNetwork.com, where you'll get the answers right away to your question to help you answer the question correctly. Then after you get that, that's your touchdown. Then you can either go for a point after attempt or a 2-point conversion. You make the decision, score as many points as you can for that day. And this is a practice session here in May. In June, we're going to have a big contest coming up where the points will count and emails will be collected so that we know exactly who is scoring those points, and a prize will be awarded to the winner. Look at the rules on PigskinDispatch.com under Contests and Trivia. To get that in your email inbox every single day, make sure you are an email subscriber, top of PigskinDispatch.com, or in the show notes of this podcast. We'll get you there with just a couple simple, quick questions. Now, let's get into our Football History Rewind, part number 42, the 1921 season. As we alluded to in the Football History Rewind, part number 41 last week, the American Professional Football Association met on April 30th, 1921 in Akron, Ohio to handle some items of business after their first season. Remember, the APFA became the NFL in 1922. Well, one such agenda piece was to award the Akron Pros, the team with the best record in 1921, the inaugural APFA championship title. Besides this, the association was reorganized with Joe Carr of the Columbus Panhandles named as president. We have a great post, an article, an interview on Joe Carr with Chris Willis of NFL Films. You can just go up to the search box under Joe Carr. We'll get you right to that great segment we had with Chris Willis about a year ago. Remember that Jim Thorpe had previously been the president in year one of the APFA, and the group was years away from having a commissioner, according to the ProFootballHof.com website. With Carr being named as the head, the association's headquarters was thusly moved to Columbus, Ohio, his home, and a league constitution and bylaws were drafted, giving teams territorial rights, restricting player movements, and developing membership criteria for the franchises. Joe Carr was quite the organizer, as Chris Willis points out. The league would play under the rules of the National Collegiate Athletic Association football rules of 1921. Yeah, they played by the college rules. And the official standings were issued for the first time so that there would be a clear champion. Probably the most significant revisions to the bylaws were that only games played against fellow league teams could count towards the standings. This single change inspired two forms of growth and unity because it both encouraged outside independent teams such as those from the Ohio League and the New York PFL to join, but also caused those that did not join to fold within a few years because NFL teams, particularly those competing for championships, would be much less willing to play what were effectively exhibition games against these teams that were non-league members and that would not help them in the standings. More on the APFA and some of those rules in the standings, especially the tiebreaker, because that gets extremely interesting. Now let's get into some of the rules of 1921 that changed. And according to Spalding's National Collegiate Athletic Association football rules, football was in two separate words back then. For the 1921 season, there was a list of revisions that would be instituted in the upcoming season. The first item was that the committee would no longer recommend, but would urge that all players be numbered. Numbers on the jerseys. Looking at some of the old photographs provided with this article, the reader can see how most players were specifically identifying numbers to allow officials and fans alike to distinguish one player from another. This was found in the end of the rule book in Rule 3, but a rule right above it, though not a change in 1921, it was nonetheless very interesting. So it wasn't really mandated they had to wear the numbers, but it was urged, as they said. Rule 3 says that, Section 3 says, no player having projecting nails or iron plates on his shoes or any other metallic or hard substance on his person shall be allowed in the game. If head protectors are worn, they were not yet called helmets, remember. No sole, leather, paper mache, or any hard, unyielding substance shall be used in their construction. All devices for protection must be arranged and padded in the judgment of the umpire to be without danger to other players. Leather cleats upon the shoes shall be allowed. End quote. This was all the rules that applied to the mandatory equipment in 1921. I know that the materials technology was not invented yet, but what do you suppose may have happened if a player in 1921 showed up at a game wearing a modern composite helmet with a face mask and a pair of vulcanized Nike cleats from our era? Well, per the letter of the rules, the umpire may deem that the player's equipment to be illegal. How far we have advanced in some 90 years. And the writer could also assume that the player must have tried to play at one time or another with nails protruding from the bottom of their shoes. And thank the good Lord that the Rules Committee disallowed this flash of brilliance by some of those players that were going out there to try to gain an advantage. Now, the penalty clause for the pre-mentioned rule number 3 on equipment was, quote, suspension, assumed to be the violating player, unless the fault is corrected within 2 minutes. That's some pretty lax penalty. This means that our genius who hammered the penny nails in the bottom of his shoes goes unpunished as long as he could change his footwear in less than 120 seconds after getting caught? Maybe so. Now, rule number 3, section 2 said that in the 1921 NCAA football rules book, we get another interesting written rule that would be quite foreign to our present rules on a topic of substitution. It says, quote, a player may be substituted for any other at any time, but before engaging in play, he must report to the referee or umpire, end quote. The 1921 verbiage goes on to state, quote, an incoming substitute shall not communicate in any way with any of the other players upon the field until after the ball has been put in play, end quote. So you could not shuttle a play in from the sideline at that time because they weren't allowed to talk to him until the ball was snapped. So that's quite an interesting rule, very foreign to the way we play the game of football now. It's extremely interesting. So the quarterbacks really had to call their own plays because coaches weren't allowed to signal or verbally call in plays to the quarterback or even send in a shuttle guy. Extremely interesting indeed. Glad that has changed. There are many legendary tales of how coaches cheated the system by some very clever means, inconspicuous signals such as coughs, and coaches' bodily positioning and other interesting secret codes bypass this intended rule. The committee wished for the game and its strategy to be placed solely on the participants without outside interference, and it was not always what truly occurred. The 1921 rules are very interesting indeed, and we take a look at more of them in the next installment of the series, coming soon on pigskindispatch.com. But before we go today, let's finish this season of 1921. The college season had no clear-cut champion that year, and officially the NCAA Division I football records book lists that the California Golden Bears, Cornell Big Red, Iowa Hawkeyes, Lafayette Leopards, Washington and Jefferson Presidents and the Vanderbilt Commodores all shared the 1921 title. Only California, Cornell, Iowa, and Lafayette claim that they won national championships for that 1921 season. The others, not so much. It also should be duly noted that California and Washington and Jefferson, well, they played in the 1922 Rose Bowl that year. The contest was hard fought, a scoreless tie, so it really didn't help settle anything, at least between those particular schools, who was the top dog. And that game was also the last Rose Bowl to be played at Tournament Park. More Rose Bowl history has made too, as Washington and Jefferson still remains the smallest school ever to play in a Rose Bowl. That'll be a good trivia question someday, huh? Well, now let's go back to professional football in the 1921 APFA season. There was some controversy in store for the American Professional Football Association. The dilemma was that according to rule, the league champion would be the team with the best record. Remember, we discussed that just a bit ago, that April 30th meeting. Well, what do you do in the case of a tie? Well, the Chicago Staleys finished with a 9-1-1 record, while the Buffalo Americans finished with an almost identical 9-1-2 mark. And it wasn't quite likely that too many experts, especially in the Buffalo area, agree with that. There was a championship controversy on the 1921 became known among some sports historians as the Staley swindle. Yeah, the ever clever and conniving George Halas evidently talked the All-Americans into playing an exhibition game on December 4th, 1921. Buffalo had finished the season with a 9-0-2 record. Darn near perfect except for those two ties. Meanwhile, Chicago captured second place with their only loss coming against Buffalo on Thanksgiving Day. That was a big game indeed. From the All-Americans' point of view, Buffalo owner Frank McNeil had already scheduled the team's last game for December 3rd that year against the Akron Pros. Win or lose against Akron, McNeil figured that they had the advantage over the Staleys due to the Turkey Day head-to-head victory over them. Head-to-head had to mean something. Well, the Staleys had refused to play any road games that season, and they made an exception for that Thanksgiving Day game tilt against the then undefeated All-Americans, who also played all their games at home that year. Interesting. Staley's owner, player, and coach, George Halas, then challenged the All-Americans to a rematch. Now, McNeil agreed to play this one last contest on the condition that game was considered only to be a postseason exhibition match and not to be counted in the standings. Exhibitions were very common back then because it got the players and the coaches and even the owners some extra money. Remember, it's right before Christmas. Get some extra jingle in their pocket because those generally brought in some great funds at the gate. And when you have two teams that just vied for basically a championship on Thanksgiving Day, it was considered, and it was a close game. And now they're going to have sort of a rematch match and rubber game of that series. Well, that would bring in all kinds of people if it was an exhibition or not. Now, McNeil made the point of telling the Buffalo media that the game was an exhibition and would have no bearing on the team's claim to the APFA title. They figured they had it cinched. He even said to the press that the Akron game should be an exhibition game as well because it really was going to have no merit or meaning to it. If they lost, they'd still have the identical records to Chicago, but they beat Chicago in the head-to-head match. The second Buffalo versus Chicago game was then scheduled that day after the All-American team's final game against Akron. Therefore, after the game scheduled for December 3rd against the tough Akron Pros, who we just discussed had won the APFA championship for 1920, McNeil's team would take an all-night train to Chicago to play the Staleys the very next day. While they were weary from playing 2 days in a row and traveling all night via the rail to the Windy City, the Staleys ended up outlasting the All-Americans 10-7 to win this rematch. Now, McNeil, believing his team was the APFA's 1921 champion, invested in some tiny golden-coated footballs for his players to commemorate the milestone of being the champions. And even with the loss, should it have counted, Buffalo still would have won the title game. Buffalo was still 9-1-2, and Buffalo was at the time 8-1. So the Staleys were a half game behind Buffalo in the standings because the All-Americans played more games in the season. Well, don't think that this didn't go unnoticed by a wise player coach in Chicago. That crafty George Halas saw a loophole opportunity and quickly scheduled 2 additional and previously unscheduled games in December, one against the Canton Bulldogs and the other against their crosstown rivals, the Chicago Cardinals. Now, any time that these teams could get to play against the Chicago Staleys, who were one of the top teams, they contested the championship in 1920 of the Akron Pros, as did the Buffalo All-Americans, and lost that fight, their claim of championship there. But the Canton Bulldogs and the Chicago Cardinals, they wanted some extra money too. So playing the Chicago Staleys would give them some extra money because fans would come to the stands definitely to see them. Now, should the Staleys have won both those games, that would have propelled Chicago to a 10-1 record in the league standings, a half game ahead of the 1-2 Buffalo squad, and assured them, the Staleys, of the championship. Well, the Staleys defeated Canton easily 10-0 on December 11th, but in the rematch of the game with the Cardinals on December 18th, it ended up in a scoreless tie. Thus, the two teams now were tied at 9-1, and the APFA rule did not allow ties to even count in the official league standings at the time. So basically, they were just 9-1. There's no ties involved in that. So Halas declared publicly that the APFA league title belonged to Chicago and began a dastardly campaign to persuade other owners in the league to give his Staleys a title. Halas based his claim for the championship on his belief that the second game of the Buffalo-Chicago series mattered much more than the first had. There was something on the line for that one. The Staley boss also contended that the aggregate score of the two games was 16-14 in favor of the Chicago Staleys. Well, McNeil, on the other hand, insisted that the Buffalo was the champions, and he maintained that the last two games his team played were merely exhibition games. At the persuasion of Halas, a new APFA rule was established that a second game would be worth more credit to a record than the first game was against the same team. But the Buffalo contention was that the second meeting in Chicago was an exhibition, that was thusly overturned, and the Buffalo All-Americans somehow unintentionally surrendered the 1921 APFA championship title to the Chicago Staleys and their very clever owner-coach, George Halas. The Staley swindle. So that's a great little bit of history. 1921, a very interesting year in football history, and when controversy always is, and it's always some great things, and a tie atop of the NCAA teams to claim title there too. So it's a very interesting year, some great rule changes, and some very interesting ones indeed. We're glad you joined us here for some more great football history. Hope you'll join us tomorrow when we will talk some more on football history, because we do it each and every day here on PigskinDispatch.com. Follow us on Twitter at Pigskin Dispatch, Facebook, the Pigskin Dispatch Facebook page, and you can always send your feedback and comments or suggestions to us via email, pigskindispatch@gmail.com. Till tomorrow, everybody, have a great Gridiron Day. We're taking a peek over at the chains and the down marker. It's 4th and long. We're going to have to punt the ball and get on out of here, but we'll have another series tomorrow for your football history headlines, so be sure to tune in. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast. PigskinDispatch.com is a proud affiliate of the Sports History Network, the headquarters of sports yesteryear.
Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? You should check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Pictorum Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. Instead of a boring old tie, get him a historic baseball photo taken by Henry High Sandom at the historic Polo Grounds Stadium in New York City during the 1894 Temple Cup. Or, if he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL poster. These are so good looking that you'll be amazed how they turn out. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order.